My neighbor knocked on my door and said, "Your dog keeps getting into my yard and ruining my garden." I apologized and offered to pay for damages. 2 weeks later, I installed security cameras and discovered what was really destroying his precious flowers. And it wasn't my dog. I'm Daniel, 32 years old, male, and I swear I've never been more blindsided by a neighbor in my life. 2 weeks ago, I was standing in my doorway, holding back my dog Max, a goofy golden retriever who thinks he's still a puppy, when my neighbor Scott, 45 male, launched into me. He didn't knock politely. He banged on the door like he was serving a warrant. When I opened it, he practically spat the words at me. "Your dog keeps getting into my yard and ruining my garden." I froze. Max was wagging his tail behind me like the idiot sweetheart he is, probably thinking Scott came to play fetch. My stomach dropped, though, because Scott's the type of guy who prides himself on appearances. He's got this perfectly trimmed lawn, rows of flowers that look like something out of Better Homes and Gardens, and a constant air of, "I'm better than everyone on this street." The idea of Max wrecking all that, it made me sick. So I apologized, profusely. I told him I'd cover the damages, no questions asked. He smirked like he'd already won some silent battle, like I just confessed to being a bad dog owner. That smug face burned into me long after he stalked off. The thing is, I knew Max hadn't been in his yard. Max is lazy. His idea of chaos is stealing socks or rolling in dirt after a bath. But doubt eats at you, right? I replayed it over and over in my head. Maybe I'd left the gate unlocked one night. Maybe Max had slipped out while I was distracted. I didn't want to be that neighbor, the one everyone whispers about, the guy who can't control his dog. So I swallowed the guilt and let it go. But the next 2 weeks, Scott turned up the pressure. Every time I saw him, he'd drop comments. "Hope you've got Max under control. You know, plants don't grow back overnight." He said it loud enough for other neighbors to hear, like he was building a case against me. I started to notice the looks too, the kind that make you feel like everyone thinks you're a screw-up. That's when I caved and bought the cameras. I told myself it was just for peace of mind. 2 small outdoor security cameras, one covering my yard, one catching the fence line. Nothing fancy, just enough to see what was really happening. And when I finally checked the footage, my hands were shaking. My dog wasn't the problem. Max hadn't set foot near that damn garden. What I saw instead made my skin crawl. It wasn't Max destroying Scott's flowers. It was Scott himself. I must have replayed that clip 20 times, jaw clenched tighter each time. The timestamp was 2:17 a.m. Scott, my oh-so-dignified neighbor, crept into his own yard with a flashlight and a pair of heavy work boots. He stomped straight through his flower beds like a drunk linebacker, kicking up dirt, snapping stems, yanking plants out at the roots. Then, this is what sent a chill down my spine. He crouched down near the fence line, grabbed one of the broken stalks and tossed it over into my yard. I sat there staring at the screen, hands buzzing like I'd slammed a dozen cups of coffee. It wasn't some misunderstanding. He was setting me up. The next morning I tested him. I said casually, "Hey, Max hasn't gotten into your yard lately, has he?" Scott gave me that smug little smirk and said, "Not since I had a word with you." Like he was proud of himself. Like I should be grateful. That confirmed it for me. This wasn't about flowers. Scott wanted me branded as the bad neighbor, maybe even wanted me gone. He thrived on control, and I was just his newest target. I told my friend Lauren, 31, female, who lives 2 streets over. She laughed at first, thought I was exaggerating, until I showed her the footage. Her smile died instantly. "Daniel, that guy's unhinged." The thing is, once you see someone do something like that, you can't unsee it. I started noticing all the weird little red flags I'd brushed off. How Scott would linger outside if I had people over, pretending to water his lawn but staring. How he once suggested, half joking, that maybe Max wasn't fit for the neighborhood. How he'd walk past other neighbors and make these low, muttered comments about them not keeping up their yards, not caring about appearances. The footage gave me certainty, but it also gave me paranoia. If he was willing to destroy his own flowers just to frame me, what else was he capable of? 2 nights later, he escalated. I woke up at 3 a.m. to Max barking like I'd never heard before. Deep, frantic, not playful. When I checked the feed, my stomach dropped. There was Scott again, this time with a rake, dragging it across the side of my fence hard enough to leave gouges in the wood. Max was going berserk inside, and Scott just stood there smiling, like he wanted my dog to lose it, like he was savoring the chaos. I didn't go out there, not yet. My fists were shaking so bad I thought I'd break something. But I knew right then, this wasn't just about his garden anymore. Scott was playing a much bigger, uglier game. Don't forget to subscribe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, replaying the footage of Scott raking my fence, my chest tight with anger and adrenaline. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. I printed still frames from the video, the boots crushing his flowers, the rake against my fence, and kept them in a folder. Proof. But I didn't go to him yet. Something told me Scott wasn't the type you just call out casually. Sure enough, I didn't have to wait long. That same evening, just as I was leashing up Max for a walk, Scott stormed across the street, red-faced, holding a handful of mangled flowers like evidence in a crime scene. "This is unacceptable," he barked before I could say a word. He shoved the broken stems practically into my chest. "Your dog was at it again. Do you know how much time and money I've put into that garden?" Max was literally standing beside me on the leash, tail wagging. He hadn't even been outside all day. I forced myself to stay calm. "Scott, Max hasn't been in your yard, at all." His eyes narrowed. "So you're calling me a liar?" His voice cracked, sharp, like he wasn't used to being challenged. A couple neighbors peeked through blinds across the street. "I'm saying I have cameras now," I replied evenly, "and they show exactly who's been in your garden." That stopped him. His jaw twitched. For a second, he looked less like a furious neighbor and more like a cornered animal. But then, he laughed. This cold, hollow little chuckle that didn't match the situation at all. "Cameras?" he sneered. "You're spying on me? That's illegal. That's harassment." My stomach dropped, because right then I understood the kind of man I was dealing with. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't sorry. He was already spinning the story, turning it around, laying the groundwork to paint me as the problem. Before I could respond, he hurled the flowers at my feet and stormed off, muttering loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "Pathetic dog owner. Doesn't belong here." I stood there shaking, Max pressing against my leg like he could feel the storm brewing inside me. Later that night, I checked the footage again. Scott hadn't gone home and cooled off like I'd hoped. He'd waited until past midnight, then crept over to my fence with a can of spray paint. He didn't tag anything crude, didn't write words. He just made giant, chaotic streaks of red across the wood like he wanted it to bleed. That's when I knew this was war. The spray paint was bad enough, but what came next made it crystal clear. Scott wasn't just after my reputation. He wanted to ruin me. 2 mornings later, I stepped out to find my trash cans tipped over, garbage scattered across my driveway. At first, I thought it was raccoons, until I spotted the ripped bag shoved deliberately under my car tire. It was too precise, too staged. And when I checked the footage, sure enough, Scott, hoodie pulled over his head, grinning while he scattered coffee grounds and leftovers across my property like some deranged raccoon cosplay. I reported it to the HOA. Big mistake. By that afternoon, Scott had already beaten me to them. He filed a complaint about my dog's behavior and my unsanitary property attracting pests. The HOA president called me sounding annoyed, like I was the problem child of the neighborhood. I sent her the footage. Dead silence. Then a clipped reply. "We'll review this at the next meeting." Scott knew the system. He wasn't just crazy, he was strategic. That night, things exploded. I'd just gotten home from work when Max started barking at the front door. I opened it to find Scott standing on my porch, fist raised like he was about to pound again. He didn't even wait for me to say anything. "You think you're smart, huh? With your little cameras? With your little edits?" His face was red, spit flying as he leaned closer. "You can't trick people. Everyone knows your mutt's a menace." I held my ground. "I have proof, Scott. Video proof. You're the one destroying your own garden. You're the one vandalizing my fence. You're the one spreading trash around." Something broke in him right then. His eyes glassed over, his whole body shaking. Then he shouted, so loud half the street probably heard, "You don't belong here!" And before I could react, he kicked over one of my potted plants, sending ceramic and soil exploding across the porch. Max lunged, snarling, and I had to grab his collar to keep him back. That was the moment, the breaking point. No more swallowing it. No more hoping it would pass. Scott wasn't going to stop until he dragged me down with him. So I made a choice. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to end this. And the way I'd do it? By making sure everyone saw Scott exactly as he was, unmasked, unstable, and dangerous. Don't forget to subscribe. Update. Wow, I did not expect this to blow up the way it did. First off, thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. It was weirdly comforting to see strangers online calling Scott every name in the book. Some of y'all had me laughing so hard I nearly spit out my coffee. Your neighbor is auditioning for the role of Psycho Nar 3 in a low-budget horror film was my personal favorite. But the serious advice? I took it. Cameras backed up to the cloud. Multiple copies of everything. I even started keeping a written log of dates, times, and what Scott's pulled. Several of you said he'd eventually try to flip the narrative harder than he already has. And you were right. Because since my last post, it's gotten even uglier. The night after Scott smashed my potted plant, I caught him again on camera, this time in my backyard. He must have climbed the fence because suddenly he's there, creeping around with a flashlight, poking at the grass like he's searching for something. At one point, he actually crouched down and sprinkled what looked like fertilizer or powder along the fence line. No clue what it was, but I saved every frame. I didn't confront him this time. Honestly, I was scared. It's one thing to scream on my porch. It's another to trespass in the middle of the night. That's when I realized, this isn't just neighborhood drama. This guy is unstable. And yet, the wild part? He's still parading around in the daytime acting like I'm the villain. Yesterday, while I was mowing, I saw him talking to two neighbors across the street, pointing at my house, throwing his hands up dramatically. I couldn't hear the words, but the looks on their faces said everything. He's poisoning the well. A few people here told me to go nuclear with the footage right away. Post it in the neighborhood Facebook group, send it to the HOA, email it to everyone. Tempting. God, it's tempting. But something in me wants to play this differently. I don't just want Scott exposed. I want him shattered. I want everyone to see him in real time, with no room for spin, no way for him to wriggle out of it. So yeah, the revenge plan has started. I'm not going to spoil all the details yet, but let's just say my cameras aren't the only ones Scott should be worried about anymore. Stay tuned. I knew I couldn't just dump the footage online yet. Scott would spin it, claim it was edited, claim I was stalking him. Hell, the guy might even smash my cameras before people had the chance to believe me. I needed something undeniable. So I set a trap. I repositioned one of my cameras to face not just the fence, but the alleyway that runs behind our houses. Then I bought a cheap solar light and set it low to the ground near the fence line, bright enough that anyone snooping around at night would be caught in full detail. The next step? I baited him. I went out during the day, loud enough for Scott to overhear, and planted a few bright tulips in a pot near the fence. I even made a show of patting Max on the head and saying, "Stay away from these, buddy." Scott was outside watering his yard at the time. He didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw twitch. That night, right on schedule, my phone pinged. Motion detected. The footage made my blood boil, but it also made me smile. Scott climbed the fence again, this time carrying a shovel. He walked straight to the pot, dug up every tulip like a madman, and then, like some kind of ritual, he smashed the pot against my fence. Pieces of ceramic scattered everywhere. And the best part? The new angle caught his whole face, clear as day, under the light. No hoodie, no shadows. Just Scott in all his unhinged glory. But here's where it got perfect. What Scott didn't know was that I wasn't the only one filming. My friend Lauren, the one who'd seen the earlier footage, had agreed to help. She parked her car a street over and walked by, accidentally, right as Scott was in my yard. She filmed the entire thing on her phone, Scott clambering back over the fence with dirt on his hands, red-faced and panting like a guilty burglar. Double angles, independent witnesses, zero room for him to twist it. The next morning, I didn't go to him. I didn't go to the HOA. I went bigger. I emailed the footage to every board member and quietly dropped it into the neighborhood Facebook group with a simple caption. Since my dog keeps getting blamed, here's who's actually been destroying gardens. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up. Neighbors commenting in shock, some laughing, some furious. People tagging Scott's wife. Someone even wrote, "This explains why my fence got slashed last month." By noon, Scott's perfect image had cracked wide open. And by evening, Scott himself showed up at my door again. Only this time, he wasn't smug. He was shaking. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Delete it! Take it down!" Max growled low beside me, and I just stood there, calm for the first time in weeks, and said, "Not a chance." That's when Scott snapped for real. When I told him, "Not a chance," Scott lost it. He shoved a finger in my chest and screamed, "You're ruining my life!" His voice was so loud porch lights started flipping on up and down the street. I didn't back down. "You did that to yourself?" That one line must have set off whatever fuse was left in him because he went full nuclear. He stomped off my porch, then turned back, grabbed one of the shattered ceramic shards from the tulip pot, and hurled it at my fence. It clanged against the wood and split in two. Max barked so loud it echoed. By then, at least 6 neighbors had stepped outside. I spotted Lauren filming from her yard across the way. Another guy, Dave, shouted, "What the hell's going on?" Scott spun around, pointing at me like a wild preacher. "He's lying to all of you. He edited those videos. He's trying to frame me." It was almost laughable, because the more he shouted, the more unhinged he looked. His face was beet red, sweat dripping down his forehead, his hands shaking as he ranted about conspiracies and doctored footage. Then he made the mistake that sealed everything. He stormed into his yard, grabbed a rake from beside his shed, and started dragging it across his own flower beds, ripping them to shreds while screaming, "See? This is what he wants you to think I did." Neighbors gasped. One woman actually yelled, "Scott, oh my God, stop." But he didn't stop. He went further, kicking over his garden lights, yanking plants out by the handful and throwing dirt into the street. All while yelling about me, the cameras, and how the whole neighborhood was in on it. It was surreal. Weeks of quiet paranoia had led to this. Scott demolishing the very thing he claimed to care about most in front of half the block. I didn't even have to say anything. I just stood there with Max at my side, letting everyone watch the meltdown unfold. And then, like the universe wanted to finish the scene, red and blue lights flickered down the street. Someone had called the cops. 2 officers pulled up, got out, and within minutes, Scott was being held back while still shouting about me, the HOA, and evidence tampering. The cops looked baffled, but when I handed them my folder of printed stills and told them I had full footage backed up online, their expressions shifted fast. Scott wasn't arrested that night, but he was warned hard about trespassing and destruction of property. The cops told him they'd be reviewing the videos, and if it checked out, charges could follow. As the patrol car drove off, the neighborhood was dead silent. Everyone staring at the wreckage of Scott's once perfect garden. And I swear, for the first time since this started, I felt in control again. Update 2. Well, I guess I don't have to worry about anyone believing Scott anymore. I didn't even have to do anything. He basically detonated himself in front of the whole block. The number of DMs I've gotten from neighbors since is insane. One guy down the street literally wrote, "I thought you were exaggerating. Then I saw him scream at his own flowers with a rake." Holy hell. So yeah, thanks for all the advice after my first update. To the folks who said, "Just wait, he'll implode on his own," you nailed it. It was like watching a live-action Reddit story play out in real time. And here's the kicker. Apparently, I wasn't the only one dealing with him. Since the meltdown, neighbors have been coming forward. Dave, the guy across the street, said Scott's complained to him 3 times in the past year about kids trespassing when his kids were literally in their own driveway. Another family admitted Scott once called animal control on their cat, claiming it was feral. The cat is declawed. The man's been waging little wars all over the neighborhood, but no one compared notes until now. My footage and his tantrum pulled it all into the open. As for official stuff, the cops came back the next day. They asked me to provide full digital copies of the footage. I did. Scott hasn't been arrested yet, but they told me outright that if he sets foot on my property again, it's trespassing charges on the spot. The HOA, which used to act like I was the nuisance, sent me an email basically begging for the video files too. They're reviewing his standing. Translation: his perfect reputation there is finished. And me? I've been sleeping better. Way better. Max is calmer too, like he senses the tension's finally broken. Some of you in the comments said I should feel bad, like maybe Scott's dealing with some mental health issues. Look, maybe that's true, but he made a choice to harass me, to vandalize my property to try and set me up. He crossed lines over and over. If anything, what happened was just him finally showing everyone else the monster I'd already been living next to. And honestly, watching him destroy his own precious garden, the thing he lorded over the whole block, was the sweetest revenge I could have imagined. Poetic even. I'll keep y'all posted if the cops or HOA follow through with anything official. But for now, let's just say Max and I are enjoying some peace. And my cameras are staying right where they are. The morning after update 2, I couldn't believe how fast the fallout spread. By 9 a.m., a neighbor I barely knew knocked on my door with coffee and said, "You're a saint for putting up with him this long." By noon, screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group were making the rounds. Someone had posted my video side by side with footage of Scott's meltdown from across the street. The comments were brutal. Everything from jokes about neighborhood Godzilla to people asking if he'd finally lost his job. The HOA moved quicker than I expected. They scheduled an emergency board meeting, and for once I didn't have to beg for a seat. They invited me. When I walked in, every board member looked grim. One of them straight up said, "Daniel, you've been more patient than any of us could have been. We're sorry." That same night, the board voted to fine Scott for vandalism, destruction of community property, the mess he threw into the street, and conduct unbecoming of a resident. Basically, HOA speak. For we're done protecting you. The cops didn't waste time either. 2 days later, a patrol car rolled up to Scott's house. I saw the officers go in and come out with a bag of, I don't even know what. Fertilizer? Chemicals? Whatever it was, they looked serious. Later, another neighbor told me Scott had been caught storing illegal pesticides in his shed. Turns out his obsession with perfect gardens was more toxic than anyone thought. And here's the thing, Scott didn't retreat quietly. Oh no, he doubled down. The night after the cops' visit, I caught him standing in his driveway, screaming at anyone who walked past. "You're all against me. You're letting him poison this neighborhood." He pointed at my house, shouting like a street preacher. But now, instead of nodding or staying quiet, people shouted back. One woman yelled, "You poisoned yourself." Another guy said, "We're done with your crap, Scott." It was like the whole block had been waiting for permission to unload on him. And in the middle of it all, I was just sitting in my living room with Max, watching through the blinds, shaking my head. It hit me then. Scott wasn't the powerful, smug neighbor who held all the cards anymore. He was exposed, cornered, unraveling in front of everyone. And I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The unraveling didn't drag on for long. Within a week, Scott went from the neighborhood tyrant to a pariah. The HOA hit him with over $3,000 in fines. When he tried to appeal, they played the footage on a projector at the meeting. Neighbors gasped, some laughed, but the board just sat there stone-faced until he stormed out. Then came the cops again. This time, they served him with an official trespassing order. He was told flat out, "Step onto my property once more, and he'd be arrested." I heard from Dave across the street that Scott's wife had been quietly packing boxes. By the end of the month, a moving truck was parked outside their house. No goodbye, no explanation. They were just gone. And the garden? What used to be his pride and joy was left in ruins. The once perfect rows of flowers were bare dirt, trampled and dug up from his own tantrums. Every time I walked past it, it felt like poetic justice, his obsession destroyed by his own hands. The best part, though, was how the neighborhood shifted. People who'd barely waved at me before started stopping to talk. One neighbor brought me cookies and said, "You did us all a favor." Another offered to help repaint my fence where Scott had gouged it. Even the HOA president, who I'd hated, came by and apologized in person. As for Max, He got spoiled rotten. The neighbors who once gave me dirty looks now stopped to pet him, slipping him treats like he was some local hero. One kid down the street even drew a picture of Max with the caption, "Good boy detective." I stuck it on my fridge. Sometimes at night, I'd sit on the porch with Max looking at the quiet street and feel this deep relief in my chest. For weeks, Scott had made me feel like I was losing my grip, like I couldn't trust my own eyes. But the truth came out, and it didn't just free me, it freed the whole block. Scott wanted to paint me as the villain, the careless neighbor who didn't belong. But in the end, it was him who burned his reputation to the ground. And now, my dog and I finally have peace. Sweet, quiet peace.